We've got a really great spread of speakers and look forward to the discussion that follows. And Una, I think I can hand over directly to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Una Rautenbach, as introduced, from the National Treasury. And thank you for this opportunity to share with you what information we have available on the local government database and reporting system. We are very excited about the database. It's been in the making for about 13 years now. Unfortunately, people don't always know what information is available, and that's why I'm excited about this opportunity. And I'm also excited to see, Rebecca, that the makeup is not our usual audience, which means that we can inform even more people of what we have on offer. So, colleagues, now that you have seen me, I'm going to switch my camera off and start the presentation. Great, I'm going to jump right into it. Just some background on where does this local government database and reporting system come from. So, as you are all aware, municipalities are responsible for delivering basic services with public funds. It is then the responsibility of national and provincial treasuries to oversee local government financial management and to ensure that municipalities manage their own affairs and exercise their powers and perform their functions. And the only way we can do that is if we receive credible information on their performance. So when the MFMA was introduced in 2023, and for those who's not aware of the MFMA, it's the Municipal Finance Management Act. It actually laid the foundation for the municipal finance management reforms. And one of these reforms was to develop a comprehensive reporting system for local government. And the intention was to collect, store, and make available information in terms of legislation. So in the MFMA, there's certain sections that require municipalities to submit certain documents and certain reports to the National Treasury, and these are the reports and information that we refer to. However, when we developed the database, the intention was only to collect that information. But there has been such a request for the information that we have available and for more information that we have expanded actually quite a bit on just having the legal documents and the legal data available. So today we have more than 3,000 registered users that's using the information on the local government database and reporting system. These users use the information for oversight, for analysis, for reporting, for benchmarking, and for research mainly. And the main users of the data is obviously the national and provincial treasuries, other sector departments such as COCTA, Stats South Africa, South African Reserve Bank, SARS, SALGA, the World Bank, and of late, especially universities such as Stellenbosch and the University of Pretoria is using our data quite extensively. So, colleagues, what type of information do we have on the local government database and reporting system? We've got financial data, and those are the legislative data like your information on budgets, your IDP projects, your in-year monitoring, monthly revenue and expenditure details. We've got creditors' age information, debtors' age information. It's information on the borrowing instruments used by municipalities, the investments they have, the conditional grants, allocations, and expenditure. There's reports on trading services performance, and these are now the big four: the water, electricity, sanitation, and waste. And then there's also a report on repairs and maintenance and lots more. Then we also have non-financial information, which is your municipal contact details, which a lot of institutions are using our database for the municipal contact details. We have municipal socioeconomic profiles. There's also details on information that has been submitted and that has not been submitted. And then obviously there's also information on municipal entities. And this is now what type of entities does municipalities have? What does these entities do? Who's the parent? Sometimes these entities are shared. So there's quite a lot of information on that. Then there's also the document submission, and those are mainly the legislative documents like your IDP's budgets, your annual financial statements, your annual reports, and then the other documents on terms of Section 74 of the MFMA that basically indicates that if there's a need for additional information, National Treasury might request so. And these information is like your procurement spend reports. There's information on our debt relief program that is required by our national and provincial treasury to do those analysis. There's information on the municipal finance recovery plans, the reports against the plans. That type of information is available as well on our database. So why do we need this central local government database? So in a nutshell, it basically allows for a single point of collection for all 257 municipalities. And by having a central point, it means that the cost to collect data and the effort to collect data is reduced. So instead of National Treasury collecting the same data then, say, for example, Cocta and Salga, and now all three of us need to validate the data, we need to chase the data. There's only one point that needs to do that. Then likewise, by having a central or a single data collection point, it means it also eliminates duplication and efforts and reporting by municipalities. So now instead of National Treasury, Cocta and Salga asking for exactly the same information, maybe just in a slightly different format, municipalities can now submit one set of data that will serve all three departments. And colleagues, I'm just using these as examples. Also, the database, when you have a central collection point, can share the data with all relevant stakeholders for their use. And then it's also possible then to standardize the reporting, which is quite important for our purposes, especially in government, because if we have standardized reporting, we can compare apples to apples. So if I'm saying municipality A, for example, is funded, and Cocta and Salga say the same municipality is funded, we are all actually looking at the same set of data to come to that conclusion, and we're not looking at different things. Then importantly as well is that a sound reporting system facilitates transparency, better in-year management and oversight. And it means then that the information and reports on the database can be used as tools by council and municipal management, as well as provincial and national government management, as early warning mechanisms to improve municipal performance. So the aim of such an early warning system is that we can identify timelessly where there's areas of risk that needs to be investigated and addressed before they become serious issues. And then lastly, and there's many more reasons why a central local government database is significant, but the last point I want to make is that when we put routine publications in the public domain, we also now allow the public to perform their oversight responsibility when it comes to managing public funds by providing them with the relevant information. So colleagues, you might want to ask, now how do I access this information? So the first local government database and reporting system, the first, I would say, set of information we make available is on this local government database and reporting system. So if you go to your browser and you type in Go Muni, it should bring up a BI portal that you can click on. If you don't see it, you can also type the address in the browser that I have put there on the side. It will bring up the screen, and then you have two options. You can either register as a user. If you click on this option, it will give you a form that you can fill in and we will give you access, or you can go public access. Now, the difference between the two is registered users have got access to more reports and documents than public users. And obviously, in terms of legislation like POPIA, We need to be mindful of who we give access to, and we need to know who we give access to. Hence, there's a little bit of a stricter measure for registered users. Like I've mentioned, though, we do have more than 300 registered users at the moment. Sorry, did I say 300? I mean 3,000. Yeah, and there's also a lot of public access. So once you have registered or you have accessed the database, it will take you to the landing page, which looks something like this. Colleagues, there's a portal, we call it portals for Go Upload. So that portal municipalities have access to, and some sector departments and provincial treasuries to upload information to. So typically, municipalities, all the information they submit to the National Treasury, they will go here and upload it to this portal. Then our next set of portals is the Go database portals, and under Go database, colleagues, we have all the reports. So all the data strings that are being submitted to the local government database and reporting system, because it's in the form of a data string, and I'm sure most of you won't understand what that data string is saying, we convert them into reports that's useful. And then these reports can be downloaded here from the local government database portal for people to use it. We also have liaised, for example, with Stat South Africa and other stakeholders. If there's a specific report, the World Bank is another example. If there's a specific report they require from us, from our data, without having to now try and put the data together themselves, so we can build that report for them and they can access it here. Another portal is the Go Public portal. So now, colleagues, those first two portals, like I've indicated, will only be accessible to registered users, and the Go Upload basically only to uploaders like municipalities. But the Go Public portal is what everybody that goes public access can see. And here, what I want to highlight especially is the municipal documentation that everybody can access, that we have available here. The municipal money portal, which is trying to simplify municipal finance information that is submitted to the database in a simplistic and easy way for communities to follow and understand. So those are now, especially for our communities that don't necessarily have a municipal finance background, to make it easy for them to follow and, like we say, follow the money and see what's happening in their respective municipality. And then we also have Municipal Data API, where we find especially your service providers doing work for government can build their own type of reports and access data for their own databases. That is available under municipal money. Then the last portal I want to show you see there's a lot of sub-portals under Go Public. There's also our dashboard portal, but then we also have a Go Training. So Go Training, colleagues, I want to highlight the Go Muni Navigation Training, this portal. And the reason I want to highlight this is because we won't have enough time today to take you through everything on the local government database and reporting system. This is a very high level presentation on what is available there. To can go and explore further and know where to go to explore further. So under Go Muni, you will find that we have training. We have monthly training on Go Muni to assist users as to where to get information, how to draw the information, what parameters to use. It's very easy, but we do find that users do need that first navigation session just to kind of tell them where to go and where to click, and then it's easy for them after that. But if you can't make the training sessions, where on the training calendar we've got dates and registration links for the training, then you can also go to the navigation of Go Muni and access the information and guidelines we have there. And these information It's in the form of a manual. There's even recordings. So if you don't have time to read a whole manual, you can also just refer to the recording that takes you through the manual. And there's different guidelines here as well that you can access to get to the data. Colleagues, just to show you the difference between the registered users and public users, just wanted to show you, you can see here's a whole list of documents. Now, these are the documents that the municipalities submit to us on the Go Upload portal. There's a whole list of that. I'm not going to go through the list, but if you then go and have a look at public users, you can see the list is a bit shorter. So on the public use, we only make available documents that is required to be made available to the public as per legislation. And you can see that list is a bit shorter, so it is more beneficial to be a registered user. Okay, so colleagues, the good news doesn't end there. We also have the MFMA webpage. And on the MFMA webpage, we also have a host of valuable information that can assist colleagues with their analysis and dashboards and benchmarking. Now, here I've posted this page so you can just see this is kind of the full list on the MFMA webpage of what is available. But what I want to focus on is our publications. So if you go to publications, and because this session is specifically on using data for benchmarking, I just wanted to highlight that the data that we use is benchmarked in these publications, especially the municipal budget information, the Section 71 information, and the State of Local Government Finances reports. So if you go into these folders, you'll see there's a lot of supporting information, there's a lot of supporting documents, and also then the main reports and the media statements in some cases, where we will then summarize and analyze and compare provinces, compare metros, compare secondary cities to each other in these documents. So please, if you want to see our benchmarking, please go and refer to those documents. Okay, then just the other examples where we use the data for benchmarking is the National Treasury. As mentioned, our routine publications, especially our quarterly Section 71 MFMA reports. There's our annual budget information report, and then there's the annual State of Local Government and Financial Management report. And all of those are available on the MFMA webpage, which I now showed last. The data for to benchmark is annually when we meet with the 17 non-delegated municipalities. Then we do a benchmark exercise where we compare metros with other metros, and we compare the secondary cities with other secondary cities, so that, you know, the metros and cities can see, you know, for my budget size, for example, and this is now also just an example, I have increased my tariffs by quite a bit more than the next metro that's almost my size. So that is normally quite an interesting discussion we have, and it's on the tabled budgets, and it's to kind of give municipalities or the 70 non-delegated municipalities that benchmark as to how do you fare compared to your counterparts. Funny enough, the ratepayers associations are normally also very interested in this information, especially when it comes to increase in the household bills compared to other metros or secondary cities of the same size. Then we also have the Section 71 dashboards, which is available on the MFMA webpage, where we also offer benchmarking against municipalities, against provinces. Users can go and draw that information. It's actually available on the public portal, so the public can also draw that information. And this is currently based on published data data that was published in terms of the Section 71 MFMA report. I've also touched early on and showed you we've got the municipal money portal on the sorry, this is not MFMA, the Section 71 dashboards, municipal money and municipal API is actually available on our local government database and reporting system. So apologies for that error, colleagues. But there also citizens can go on municipal money and they can compare how their municipality is doing to how other municipalities are doing. And then the municipal API, like I indicated earlier, is where people can build their own data sets, and here they can also compare how other municipalities are doing in comparison with them. So just to show you just an example, this is our Section 71 dashboards. As you can see, it contains information on debtors, creditors, grants, cash flow, revenue and expenditure, audit outcomes, and then the MFMA Section 138 and 140 targets. So there's different informations that can be found, and you can see you can select your parameters of what you want to compare and benchmark against each other. On the municipal money, and I've just taken this example because this is normally that creates a lot of who's and ha's, and the benchmark meetings is the comparison and the monthly bills. Now, unfortunately, it cut off here, colleagues, but it shows you here for this specific municipality, how does the indigent for the last few years increases compare year on year, and then the affordable household, which is basically your middle classes. It goes on property value here compared to your middle income. What increases that they have year on year. And then this is the municipal data API, as I indicated to you. The list goes on. So this is just an example to show you what it looks like. So you can draw this information and build data sets, and you can build it for specific municipalities, compare municipalities to each other, and then have that information available at your fingertips. So colleagues, that is all from my side at this stage. There was just one other thing I quickly wanted to show you in the demonstration. Let me just quickly go there. So colleagues, this is the Go Muni Live. What I wanted to show you is the municipal money portal, where you can go and find your municipality. I'm just going to take Umhlatu's and KZN, and just to show you the information that it does contain. It shows you population size, density, it shows you financial performance, income, spending, households built, and resources. And here you can see the contact details of the main people. It shows you the financial outcomes there. And you can see this municipality has been doing exceptionally well in terms of the audit outcomes over the last few years. It shows you their cash balances, gives you explanation on what is good, what is bad, and how this municipality is doing. And this is what I indicated for your general public that doesn't necessarily have background on municipal finance. This is very useful. There's your cash coverage, also indicating to you what does it mean when we say 4.9 months. Is this good? Is this bad? What should it be? The spending of the operating budget. So it gives you all of that type of information, colleagues, and also the information I showed you earlier on household bills can also be found here. And then, of course, I'm not going to go there now, but you can also take your municipality and compare it of what's happening in another municipality to benchmark should you want to. Colleagues, I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Una. We'll take questions during the course of the session and we'll discuss them at the end. I'm now going to hand over to Danga from SACN, and as the producer of the State of City Finances report, Danga can give us a bit more insight into some sort of deeper level analysis that gets done with municipal finance data. So over to you, Danga.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you for having me on the platform today. Looking forward to the discussions. And as Nick mentioned, I'll be speaking to the State of City Finances, which is produced by the South African Cities Network, that attempts to benchmark metro performance and financial performance specifically. I'll just turn off my camera while I share my presentation. Just to give you an overview of my presentation today, I'll just give you a brief introduction to the South African Cities Network Municipal Finance Program, then go into a diversion into speaking to the State of City Finances reports that we produce on a regular basis, and then make some reflections and observations regarding the provocation, or the topic rather, of today's webinar, which is benchmarking municipal finance data. The South African Cities Network, which was established in 2002 by the then Department of Provincial and Local Government, the South African Local Government Association, COGTA, as well as the then 6 metropolitan municipalities, basically is a think tank for that particular subset of the municipal universe, researches the state of big city finances, and you'll see the number of metros has increased, of course, to 8 now, but we also included Sunduzi, and have done that historically from the time that Sunduzi was keen on becoming a metro. And the purpose of our analysis is really to determine their general financial well-being, but also assess the ability of cities to deliver on developmental mandates. The publication is targeted at senior municipal administrators and politicians, also officials in provincial and national spheres of government, with an interest in public finances and the intergovernmental fiscal framework. And it indeed is a publication which we're quite proud. It's a flagship SA Cities Network publication, along with the State of South African Cities, which comes out every 5 years, which some of you may be familiar with. What we do in each publication, we start out with what we call sort of 2 historical chapters, which essentially consist of, firstly, a longitudinal analysis. So over the particular time period since the last State of City Finances, the current one will then look at changes and trends in the state of finances over that time period, and then also do a comparative analysis of the cost of metro services to households. In other words, the household bills that Una was talking about, and which of course interests us all as residents of municipalities. But also, and in fact, the bulk of the publication has in many years consisted of chapters that identify some of the key issues that cities may want to advocate for policy and other reforms to enable them to fulfill this developmental role. And I'll go into this a little bit later as well, but the Cities Network really, as I mentioned, we're an organization for our participating metros, and our work is very often targeted towards supporting them within the intergovernmental system, and also advocating policy positions that are beneficial to the metropolitan subset. So just to give you an indication of the publications we've had so far, the first was in 2007, but this is the State of City Finances report in 2011. Since then, it's been every 2 years. We provided a comprehensive update on the financial state of city governments, but also looked at changes in revenue and expenditure that were observable then. In 2013, we then added a bit of analysis around the implications of certain changes in thematic areas that affected the sustainability of finances, but also made linkages between the affordability of city tariffs, the maintenance of infrastructure, and then also the green agenda on its impact on city finances, and also the sustainability of finances more generally. In 2015, the report called for cities to address gaps and inefficiencies in the financial system. We talked about getting the basics right, so around revenue and expenditure, but also encourage cities to explore innovative solutions and actually alternative revenue sources, own revenue sources, to enable them to meet the current and future developmental challenges, and indeed the fairly ambitious outcomes we have in terms of urban spaces in the country. It also suggested that the system rethink how cities are financed to sustain and drive critical agendas, but also how to provide for sustainable human settlements, and also advocated for improving mobility through affordable and integrated public transport, and quite importantly also called for the devolution, therefore, of the human settlements function and transport to metros. In 2018, this report was probably the most comprehensive so far, and focused on, I suppose, what arguably is the major goal of our urban policy, as epitomized in the Integrated Urban Development Framework, which is to realize spatial transformation. In other words, to reverse the distorted settlement patterns that apartheid legacy has left us with, but ensuring by doing that, to ensure that budgets are aligned with policy and that urban planning reflected that orientation. We also spoke again about alternative financing solutions, but also that cities needed to be aware of and therefore think of innovative ways to tackle the challenges to finances posed by diversification in the energy sector. So moving away from having a sole provider in the form of Eskom as a source of electricity, but also the growing impact of climate change and the need therefore for climate resilient infrastructure. In 2020, we shone a light in the policy chapter, if you will, on the local government fiscal framework, but also very interestingly on the local government equitable share, which has, for obvious reasons, has been quite a bone of contention, I suppose, between the three spheres of government, with it's fair to say, I think, local government and the organized structures of local government advocating for a greater equitable share than the current 9% or so of the division of revenue. And then the most recent report in 2022 was quite different to previous reports in that the previous ones were over a 2-year time frame. In 2022, we thought we'd do something different and actually look at 2 local government administrative terms. We thought it might, from our assumption was, we might be able to draw out trends. As most of you will be aware, 2016 was a watershed election in the local government space, in that control of some of the metropolitan municipalities changed hands. And we thought we might be able to see some changes in governance that might have had an impact on municipal finances, but more on that a little later. Moving then on to the question of benchmarking municipal finance data, the analysis within this various State of City Finances reports typically covers, the obvious dimensions of financial performance. So looking at revenue and expenditure, and we've also had a focus on capital expenditure for the simple reason that if you're to ask what the basic business of local government is, it really would be to provide infrastructure and services so that both residents and businesses within those areas can thrive, both in terms of livelihoods and business activity, and hence the focus on the importance rather of capital expenditure. And just to give you some indication of the kinds of things that that we would be doing in the publication, the kinds of information we'll be reporting on. In this case, this is looking at, there'll be 2 slides looking at the revenue side. So this slide is looking at electricity service revenues, comparing 2011 to 2016, that first local government term, with 2016 to 21, the second. And so you can see that it's quite clearly, we're comparing the cities across there, able to draw an average of the change. You'll see the second to bottom row. And you can compare, and you can see, you can probably sense my slight discomfort. So in listening to the provocation and my earlier statements that the genesis of the South African Cities Network as an organization for cities, for the metropolitan municipalities, when we report on data from them, and in this case, financial data, we are not necessarily seeking to play off cities against each other or make one city feel that perhaps we've shone a spotlight on them unfairly. It's really to present the data in an unjudgmental way, but suggest therefore that by looking at this data, cities can inform themselves by looking at what their peers are doing, and report in that way. So I think it would be important for us to mention that. What is very interesting, though, is the analysis then, or the thinking that goes behind particular trends that you would observe in the data. So in this case, able to explain the decrease in the growth in electricity service revenues as a result of lower Eskom bulk tariff increases. Also the observation that volumes of electricity, however, are growing less rapidly. And then implying meaning to that. So really I'd say probably the biggest value add, and given the extensive sources of data which we know was mentioning and that are published regularly by the National Treasury, this is slightly different in that we tend to look perhaps at slightly different angles. But I think also, and you would have seen in the reporting over the past couple of years, of course, something like comparing cities in terms of their non-revenue electricity, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner there, really can be quite enlightening. So without saying anything in particular, you can see if you were to compare, for example, Joburg and Ekurhuleni, you have about 30% non-revenue electricity versus 16% in Ekurhuleni. So, people can draw their own conclusions as to how they would like to take that information forward, but we think it's very useful to share nonetheless. In this case, another source of own revenue, looking at property rates revenue, you will see that we're able to, and thanks to the data, and I should say at this point that this data is drawn from the municipal money, the API that National Treasury provides, which allows us to be able to do all this kind of analysis. And we're able to think through some of the reasons why we might see differences in the rate of growth of property rates revenue in those cities across the two local government terms. Not surprisingly, you would see an increase in property rates revenues when a new valuation rule comes in. Property values tend to rise over time. But also interesting, and this was one of the areas in which we were able to see a slight, or perhaps impute some element of governance in what the data that we're seeing, in that some of the rates increases were limited by decreasing the cent and the increase in the cent and the rand rate that was applied. And we saw that in a few cities, and we saw news reports of that. I'm sure those of you who follow the space will have seen that. Moving now on to some cost categories, in this case, employee-related costs. This would be something that, for example, I imagine information that might be of interest to people calling for greater efficiencies in the use of municipal revenue, that employee-related costs in that second local government administration, if you will, grew more rapidly over the second term under review, which from the perspective of observers of the sector would be something that might be of concern, simply because that is not necessarily a cost category that translates into greater infrastructure within the municipality, for example. But you'll see that the kinds of data that is presented, as well as therefore comparisons to the CPI and comparison to salary increase. So I think the strength of city finances is really dependent on, number one, the number crunching that you're able to do, but I think the greatest value add is in the understanding and the greater depth to explain those numbers that we're actually seeing. And one of the things that we consistently do with the service providers who produce the reports is to corroborate the numbers that we're seeing with the Metro CFOs and their departments and staff. Another category that is of great interest for those who are advocating for greater efficiencies within the metros would be around debt impairment, one of the cost categories, of course. Not surprisingly, debt impairment exploded in 2020 due to COVID, when we had lockdown, people were not able to work, but also some of the functions around debt collection and revenue management in terms of having interactions between city residents and city businesses and the cities themselves to manage their debt and their outstanding bills were suspended. And so that, I think, is another area where you can see that it's very visible to see that change between the two terms, if you look at that. So it was an interesting report in that we were, in some cases, were able to see these jumps between one local government term and another. In other cases, not. I think it'd be fair to say that our primary aim, at least for this publication, was to try and tease out some of that governance story, which we achieved, I think, in many cases, but to a lesser extent in others. And now I'm moving on to capital expenditure. As I'd mentioned, this is a category that really speaks to the central business of cities. It's been declining as a share of total expenditure since 2016. That's looking at the blue columns on the left-hand side. And you can dig further into the detail comparing between 2011, 2016, and 21 in the table on the right-hand side. And this, as an example of what one might read from this, is that National Treasury norm for capital expenditures being 10 and 20% of total expenditure. And through this, we're able to say that, there are a number of cities which dipped below that level in 2020 and 21, which is a cause of some concern. And this then allows us to look at the value of infrastructure relative to the population calculated for each of the metros. And this is property, plant, and equipment, the value of property, plant, and equipment per person, and is 2021 figures. So this allows us to control for both inflation and population growth. And quite clearly, as you can see from this chart, you're able to look and be able to say that there's been some growth, but then a decline in terms of the value of that infrastructure relative to population in Joburg, significant decline in Ekurhuleni there on the left-hand side, contrasted with a significant improvement in Buffalo City at the bottom left-hand corner. So looking at these trends, and this is the kind of longitudinal trends that I was speaking about earlier, you can then make arguments for how things are actually going and how they should be going if they're not perhaps matching what you would expect. Now, just moving on to some reflections on what I've presented so far. I think I was already hinting at the fact that we tend not to benchmark perhaps in the way that one might expect would be coming out of an organization, say by contrast, if there's an organization, well, Outer, for example, which we all know about, I think might be far more aggressive if they're doing the same kind of reporting in terms of how they speak about it. Our aim is really, as a network, as I said, is to strengthen the ability of metropolitan municipalities to perform well and to have policy informed by evidence, but also to be aware of what their peers are doing and to learn from each other. So as a result, probably the bulk of the analysis, I think, and the way in which we speak to it would be looking at trends and some comparison between cities, and in particular, there's one element which is usually the second chapter in each report, which compares the affordability of household bills across, unlike the slide that Una was showing us, across four categories, residential customers, and is a considerable exercise in extrapolating the tariff data that cities provide, but then making some assumptions about the consumption patterns within each household and making a quite neat analysis of those bills. And interestingly, I've heard from colleagues in the city that that's one of the slides that when we present the data, they often are quite interested in, because it shows, and unfortunately shows in many cases, that the majority of our bills for residential customers are aggressive. So in fact, they affect and consume a greater portion of the income of low income consumers as high income, which of course is not ideal. I think it'd be fair to say if we are able to draw distinction. I don't know if the speaker subsequent to me, Kim, who in fact is the honcho in analyzing a lot of this data for Cities Network, we can sometimes draw group cities in terms of small cities and large cities. So not surprisingly, you might find that Joburg, Cape Town and eThekwini evince certain trends and certain characteristics of their financial performance, which are different to, say, a Mangaung or a Buffalo City, for example. And then also to say that in what we do is we're grouping and looking at a metro subset. It's so important to point that out. I think the logic around establishing the city network was that this group of 8 metropolitan municipalities would have particular characteristics in terms of their size, most importantly, and therefore the size of their budgets, in contrast to all the other categories of municipalities, so the other 249 odd that we have. And that's been consistent, something that we've done consistently through time. And one of the ways in which you can see that, for example, is I think it must have been State of Finances 2018. We looked at unauthorized, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure in the metro municipalities. And in presenting that finding and talking to it in the public space, we were at pains to stress that despite the headlines that one sees in the paper, that those categories of expenditure were perhaps not as serious as is often spoken about in the press. Just some brief thoughts on data availability. I think it's important to stress in this forum as well that it's largely as a result of National Treasury's efforts to make data widely available that we're even able to do this. And I think sometimes we shouldn't take that for granted. I think the Open Governance Partnership consistently ranks South Africa one of the highest in terms of the availability and transparency of national and subnational financial data. So we're thankful for that. And also as part of our relationship with National Treasury Intergovernmental Relations, we've been fortunate to have access to data that hasn't yet been public released. So it's which enables us to actually have something that's a little more current and perhaps come out with data a little sooner than it would otherwise emerge. And then going on to data usage, our publications are typically a print publication that we would launch and then have a range of dissemination activities around the state of city finances every time it comes out. And that, of course, and particularly nowadays, is not necessarily the only way in which people are going to get their information. And so in keeping with being a publicly funded organization, we do release that data, or the analysis that you see in each report is open and freely available on the South African Cities Open Data Portal, which is hosted by SACN, and you can find it on our website. And as I said, all the analysis and all the Excel tables are essentially there and accessible to anybody who may want to look at them. And maybe just in closing, I'll just briefly say again what this data has enabled us to do in terms of maybe not strictly so much around benchmarking, but enabled us, and I think is something which we feel very strongly about, is the ability to advocate for the metro subset within the municipal universe. So speaking to the misalignment of policy, budgets and planning, speaking to some of the contradictions perhaps between the municipal revenue and funding model and local government's mandate to promote spiritual transformation. So able to show that, for example, there's much greater incentive for cities to establish greenfield development or promote greenfield development rather than densification and brownfield development, simply because of the different differential between those two options in terms of revenue. And then also think some thoughts around the rising costs of cities, in particular input costs such as bulk electricity, and what this may mean for the sustainable funding of our cities. And that, I think, is that for me. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Danga. Some great lessons and examples of how the data can be used for sort of more deep insights, not just the sort of simple numbers and comparisons, but more practical uses. So thanks very much for that. The next speaker, Kim Walsh from PDG, is, I could say, a super user of National Treasury's data. And she's going to give us some insights into how to use or how not to use the data and what to look out for if doing your own analysis. So, Kim, if you're ready, could you present?
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm not quite sure about a super user, but I have spent many, many hours trawling through the data that Una shared earlier. And so what I've been asked to present on is some of the do's and don'ts of municipal financial benchmarking. This is a sort of a fairly scattered list of things to be careful about when using the data. So I think, my first do right up front is just to say, do use the data. There's an extraordinary wealth of data available. I think Danga has already mentioned this level of transparency and availability of data is fairly unparalleled. We're ranked 4th internationally for transparency by the International Budget Partnership. And there's a wealth of data. I noted the thing in the chat of having to manually write in a PDF form. Yes, that is the case, but I also saw the response that Treasury is looking at online registration, but obtaining access to all of this data is relatively easy, and once you get used to navigating your way around those various portals, it's fairly accessible as well. So now getting into a few more detailed suggestions and comments, and I think my presentation almost comes somewhere in between Una's and Danga's in terms of Una was talking about what data is available and what is there. Danga was talking about quite complex analysis and using it. I'm talking about a few sort of practical tips in how to get from accessing that data to using it for the kind of analysis that Danga was sharing. So some of the examples I've got here is I pulled some data from the API on audited actual income and expenditure for all municipalities in 2023. So that's a fairly standard report that you can run. When you put it up in your browser, you'll get a screen that looks something like the one shown here. And then there's an option in the top right to export to download the data, and you can export it into Excel. And so that's what I usually do is I export it out into Excel, and then I can do some analysis and graphing and dig into the data a little bit. When it exports into Excel, you get it in a format similar to the one shown here, just kind of a flat data file with all the numbers in a single column, and you can use pivot tables or Excel functions to do analysis on that data. So my first tip, and when we're talking about benchmarking, typically what you're doing, benchmarking, you're comparing things. So you're comparing perhaps data between provinces or between municipalities with expenditure types or by function or over time. So the first tip is do be aware that there are data gaps, and particularly when you're aggregating. So you'll often see people comparing total expenditure by all municipalities in a province, for example. And this analysis I've shown here is what's the average expenditure per municipality. So if we take all the expenditure by all municipalities divided by the number of municipalities, how does this compare across the provinces? And that's a fairly typical analysis one might want to do. When doing this, particularly when you're aggregating, be aware that while all the functionality for municipalities to upload data and put it into the database is there, not all municipalities, in fact, do that. And so there will be data gaps. So, for example, if you go and dig into the data here, you'll see that not every municipality and every province provided data for 2023. And so some of the municipalities, there are just blanks. So if you're trying to work out an average expenditure per municipality, in other words, total expenditure divided by number of municipalities, what you would want to do is adjust that data and make sure you're dividing only by the number of municipalities that actually reported. So to use the Northwest, for example, take all the expenditure and divide it by 14 instead of 17, because only 14 of the 17 reported data in this year. And in this example I've used here, this doesn't make a big difference on the analysis, but it does mean those average figures, had we just divided by total number of municipalities, would have been skewed. So this is mainly a tip when you're aggregating, when you're looking at, for example, all the metros or all the local municipalities, or as in this example, all municipalities in a province. Just be aware that there may be data gaps, and kind of dig into your data a little bit before you analyze it. The second point here is to find, and this isn't actually so much about data, this is more a comment on when you're benchmarking, find some sensible base for comparisons. So here we could just look at average expenditure per municipality again. So we're total expenditure divided by total number of municipalities and comparing it between the provinces. And, when you look at that graph, you're like, wow, average expenditure in Gauteng is really high. Average expenditure in the Northern Cape is really low. But of course, municipalities in the Gauteng are much more populated, and populations are much higher compared to the Northern Cape. So when we want to benchmark or draw any conclusions or analyze or think about this data, it would be useful in this case, perhaps, to adjust it for population. So to look at expenditure per capita instead of total expenditure. And that gives you a different view. Gauteng is still higher than the others, but not so much higher. And now instead we see KZN and Limpopo, for example, where expenditures are lower. This is for local municipalities only. I'm not suggesting that per capita is always the right base to use. It's more to making the point that when you are comparing, think about a sensible base for making those comparisons. My fourth tip is to remember that there are lots of ways to classify expenditures. So I'm just looking at the profile of people on the group here. There may be limited familiarity with MSCOA, but MSCOA is the Municipal Standard Chart of Accounts. And what MSCOA is a system that allows for classification of expenditure in up to 7 ways. So you can classify expenditure by item, so like it's an employee-related cost. You can classify it by a particular project it was spent on. You can classify it by the department that spent it. You can classify it by the function, so is it water or electricity, by the funding, in other words, was this funded through tariffs or grants, by regional identifier, so geographically, where is that expenditure incurred, and by costing, which is about internal charging out of expenditures. So MSCOA allows for incredibly rich classification of data. When we benchmarking, most commonly, I certainly look at expenditure by what I call type. That's the item sort of section of MSCOA, or by function. So often when benchmarking, you're either interested in comparing, well, what do employee-related costs look like between municipalities, or you're interested in comparing what do municipalities spend on water, and that's type or function. But it's important to remember that there are different ways of classifying expenditure, because it highlights the fact that when you're comparing expenditures, you need to take some care to compare apples with apples. And my next few examples relate to that. So, for example, let's say we're comparing expenditure by type. We want to compare employee-related costs. And in this case, again, from that API that I showed the screenshots of earlier, this is the employee-related costs in 2023 for each local municipality in the Eastern Cape. And what we can see is EC 157, very high, notably higher, as is EC 108 and EC 139. So the first thing is remember the point that I made previously about finding a sensible base for comparison. If we adjust these to per capita, the picture changes a little bit. So we can see that some of that high expenditure in some municipalities is just related to those being larger municipalities. The other thing to bear in mind, though, is that, in fact, the functions that local municipalities in the Eastern Cape perform differ. Not all municipalities, in fact, do the same thing. So in the Eastern Cape in particular, some local municipalities are water services authorities, and they actually provide, well, water services providers, and they provide water. In other local municipalities in the Eastern Cape, the water services are provided by the district, so the local is not incurring any expenditure on water provision. Some municipalities in the Eastern Cape are electricity distributors, some are not. In some of them, all electricity provision is undertaken by Eskom. And so obviously when we would look at employee-related costs, those expenditures would differ. You would expect that municipalities that are providing both water and electricity would be incurring higher employee-related costs than those that are providing none of those functions. And indeed, if we go and then reclassify these municipalities into the ones that are providing both water and electricity, those are the blue bars. Those that are providing not water but are providing electricity, those are the red bars. And then those that are providing neither, those are the green bars. We can see that the highest employee-related costs per capita are incurred by those that are providing both water and electricity. And we might then want to dig further into the data to unpack that. But the main point is that if we had not considered functions, and if we had just stopped at this point and looked at these expenditures, we might have drawn some incorrect conclusions because we're not really comparing like municipalities with like. And then if we flip this the other way, so this was talking about comparing an expenditure type and being aware of functions. If we wanted to compare expenditure per function, we also need to be careful of which expenditure types are being allocated. There is a very useful report in the local government database. I don't think it's publicly accessible, so I think you have to have registered for the database to access this. That provides you statements of financial performance per function. So that means you can go and pick a municipality and you can ask to see financial data for its electricity service only, or for water, or just its overheads, for example. And what you'll get for that, if you go and pull that report, this is a table that, I mean, I formatted this myself, but this is data for each of the metros on their electricity service, and the expenditures that they have recorded just for the electricity function. And so this allows you to compare functions across the municipalities. What we need to be aware of, though, is that while MSCOA allows for municipalities to allocate costs in these very complicated ways, not all of them do, in fact, do that. So, and some municipalities will still allocate costs differently to others. So again, when we're comparing, we want to make sure we're comparing as like with like as far as possible. If we look in this particular table, we can see, for example, not all of the metros report anything against debt impairment, but some report a lot against irrecoverable debts written off. So some are clearly classifying expenditures as debt impairment, while others are classifying them as irrecoverable. If I were to look at that, I would say, oh, that's okay. Cape Town and Ekurhuleni use irrecoverable, while the others use debt impairment. They're probably equivalent. But another more notable item is that Joburg here is not allocating any depreciation to the electricity function. And again, this is just about how Joburg is choosing to allocate its costs between functions. I've chosen metros here, but if we took a broader sample, a lot of municipalities are still recording all their depreciation against their finance department, for example, rather than allocating it out between functions. So again, it's just to be aware that if we compared these numbers in the bottom row here between the different metros, we wouldn't quite be comparing like with like, because most of the metros are showing some depreciation here, while Joburg is not. So it's another suggestion just to dig into your data a little bit and make sure you're comparing equivalent things when you want to draw comparisons and draw conclusions on the data. And then a final suggestion is about trends over time. So I've talked a little bit about comparing groupings, aggregating and comparing groupings of municipalities. I've talked about comparing expenditure types, comparing expenditure by function. The other thing we often want to look at is how have expenditures changed over time. There, just be aware of changes in the reporting requirements. So MSCOA was rolled out in 2019-20, and if you go into the API and the local government database, you'll see that the formats of reporting changed quite significantly in 2019-20 compared to previous years. And some of the items are classified differently. So, for example, Prior to 2019-20, there used to be an item reported on for water bulk purchases. So where municipalities were purchasing water from a water board, that sat there as an expenditure item. The handling of that changed with the introduction of MSCOA and some of the reforms around that. And the cost of water bulk is now tracked as an inventory item. So there's no longer a water bulk purchases expenditure item. So if we were just to add up all the bulk purchases for municipalities over time, it might look like these suddenly dropped from 2019-20 onwards, but that drop wouldn't be about an actual change. It would be about a change in the way that these expenditures were classified. So this is just something to bear in mind when you're looking at trends. And again, it's about making sure you're comparing like with like. So I'm sure those aren't all the do's and don'ts, and there may be others on the call who've worked with data and have lots of other thoughts. But in summary, my do's and don'ts are, do use the data, but when you're aggregating it, be careful to check for gaps. When you're making comparisons, find a sensible base. Remember, there are lots of ways to classify expenditures, and be careful you're comparing apples with apples. Specifically, when you're comparing expenditure types, remember that functions of municipalities might differ. When you're comparing expenditure per function, be careful of which types of expenditures have been allocated to that function. And finally, when looking at trends over time, bear in mind that there have been changes in reporting requirements, and that may explain some differences in numbers that you see. And that's it from me.
Thanks very much, Kim, and thanks for keeping well within time, so we've caught up a little bit. Yeah, some very useful tips there. I think your vast experience in working with the data really comes through, and people need to be aware of those idiosyncrasies of working with the data. So thanks very much for that. We're going to shift gear a little bit now to demonstrate some of the finance data that is available on the National Strategic Hub. I'm going to ask my colleague Pamelo Mahamuza to share her screen, and she's going to take us through the 3 places within the National Strategic Hub where finance data is available.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Pamela, and I'll be taking you through how we have actually incorporated some of the municipal financial data. So on the dashboard, we have displayed the data set in 2 ways, through firstly the diagnostic profiles, which looks at data aggregated at a district level. We also look at it per dashboard, where we look at it individually per specific local municipality and its districts. So if you may allow me just to quickly demonstrate this one for the districts. Let's let it load a little bit. Okay, let me take you first to the landing page. So when you are looking at the district diagnostic profile specifically, you will come across this landing space, apologies. And for today's insight, we'll specifically be looking at the theme of governance and financial management. We will look at finance and a little bit of audit data. And if you click on the finance one, it will directly take you to this dashboard. Please note that okay, I'm on a different view. Sorry, Nick, I won't be able to do the full view on my side because of this. But anyway, I will continue to show you. So on this landing page, we are specifically looking at finance. And as I mentioned, that we are looking at it per specific district. So you can toggle over to your desired district over here. We also do look at it from 2017 till 2024. As Nick mentioned, that we do constantly keep making updates onto this to ensure that we don't compare apples and bananas, I guess, in this case. So we do welcome any of your feedback. But for today's demonstration, we'll just look at the city of Johannesburg. And obviously our visuals will look at things like total revenue, percentage splits of revenue totals, consolidated operating revenue, consolidated operating expenditure. Now, let me actually look for one that's a little bit more spicier than Johannesburg. Let's look at one that incorporates some municipalities. Okay. So yeah, if we filter through the district of Zululand, we do know that Zululand does encompass local municipalities within it. So these dashboards are interactive. What that means is that what we see here, for example, with total revenue and expenditure is the consolidated amount for both district and its local municipalities. And I'd just like to point you to a disclaimer that we do have. So these are some of the key things to just pay attention to when using our dashboard. So for the visualization, let's say you're just keen on only understanding the expenditure and revenue for Zululand, you would just click on the district profile, and all the visuals will adjust to Zululand only. So we'll see here that it has adjusted to that, as well as when we look at the percentage split. But because our visuals are interactive, all other visuals will specifically only show analysis for that district. Now, if you want to look at other municipalities within the Zululand district, for example, if we want to look at Edumbe, if you click on the specific visual, you will see that the district disappears, and we will see here Edumbe, which is telling you that you are now looking at the municipality within the district. And there again, you will able to see the total revenue, expenditure, percentage split. We're able to see consolidated operating cost, where we see that actually a large bulk of that is for sales of electricity. We can also see the total municipal spend per resident. We can also look at rates, revenue, and percentage of total revenue over time. So you'll just keep playing around with that. Then you can also click at another district. Please note that to ensure that you have clicked on the correct municipality, everything else will gray out or look rather more transparent, and the district will disappear. Once you are done analyzing that specific municipality within the district, you just click on it again, and everything should go back to normal. So that's how you can do your analysis. Within the same breath, we also do have elections, but yet again, keeping to financials, we'll go to audit. And if we go to audit, yet again, you can select your districts. Please note that this is a single select, so you will have to look at one analysis at a time. I think this also keeps into what the speaker have said, that we do not want to make any assumptions by comparing one district to another. So yes, you can look at it individually. You can also look at it per financial year. So it goes back to the financial year of 2015-2016 to the most latest one, which is 2023-2024. And with that one again, if you want to look at okay, I'm going to go to a municipality I can pronounce. I'm sorry about that. Keeping to Zululand, which have become my favorite recently. If you only want to look at Zululand yet again, we click onto the district map, and everything will aggregate to Zululand. But if you care for the municipalities within it, you will start to see how other visuals will adjust to only that municipality. And in this dashboard, we do have detailed audit opinion. So for example, you can see here what the results for Edumbe for the year of 2023-2024. We can also look at things like fruitless, wasteful, and irregular expenditure. We can also look at municipal classified as distressed. And we can also look at the opinion for material irregularities. So you can play around with it. It's just a little click away. Then if this view might be a little bit more complicated and you want to view everything individually, I'd like to take your attention to the state of municipal financial health performance. And for this specific dashboard, you are able to look at all your local municipalities, metros, and districts individually without having to click around. Please allow me some time while it loads. Okay, yes, so here it's still similar to the district profile. It's just as mentioned here, it is not aggregated at a district level, but rather we are looking at the local municipality or district or metro yet again individually. So if we look at, for example, Alfred Duma as an example, we can get the analysis only for Alfred Duma throughout the years from 2017 till 2024. And same, we can still look at total municipal spend per resident. We can look at financial transfers and total revenue, contracted services, employee costs, and so forth. Yes, and for this one, yet again, we are also able to, if you click here, you don't need to go all the way back to the landing page, but you can scroll here if you want to look at audit outcomes. Still the same as the district profile, only difference is that this one is specific to the municipality and not aggregated to a district level. Still, you can look at total authorized, irregular, and wasteful expenditure. You can look at audit opinion for that financial year. You can look at material irregularities. Some municipalities have recorded the exact amount of financial loss, some hasn't, so you'll just need to toggle over that and familiarize yourself with it. And then Nick, can I move on to MIG?
Yes, please do, Pamela, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then another interesting dashboard that we do have, it is the Municipal Infrastructure Grant. Now with this Municipal Infrastructure Grant, this dashboard specifically is still working in progress. So I'd just like to point out some key things. The number that you see here is not the total number of projects, but it is the total number of projects recorded for this specific dashboard. So in no account are we saying in 2022, these are the total amount of projects. We are regularly trying to update it. So if you come back tomorrow, this value might change. So do not hold us with that one. But yeah, for MIG, yet again, the dashboards are interactive. So if you would like to look at municipal infrastructures, projects allocated per project, for example, you want to look at, let's say, Limpopo. If you just click on, my apologies. If you click on the province, everything else will then filter to that specific province. So for example, you'll see that total allocated for Limpopo was that specific amount. And then we can start to go into the specific districts within Limpopo and we can look at the allocations of it. We also narrowed this down not only from a district level, but we also did it at a local municipal level. So you can also look at the count of those projects. You can also look at trend. Sorry, you can also look at. There we go. You can also look at trend over time. So what I wanted to show earlier is that if this little dashboard and scrolling up and down is just a bit too stressful for you, please feel free to make use of this full screen functionality where the dashboard will be a little bit more palatable to you and you can make use of it. If you want to yet again scroll around different tabs, you have this option over here. And if you'd like to just fully go back, you just click on the go back icon and it will take you back to our dashboard. So remember that was the state of municipal financial health. And then I'm not told to do this, but please, if you'd like to keep up to date with our dashboards, the changes that we do make, please make sure that you follow us on the National Strategic Hub and you will get updates on our insights, our latest dashboards that we publish. So we are currently on 1,000 and something followers. Given the amount of people attending this meeting, I will be thoroughly checking this after this. And I hope you enjoyed my little demonstration. We are open to any feedback that is given. So yeah, thank you everyone.
Colleagues, we're at the end of this session and I'm going to invite the Chief Data Officer, Dr. Mbata, to close the session.
Thank you very much, Nick. So firstly, thanks to the National Strategic Hub team for incredible work to put this Insight Exchange together. And thank you so much to Danga, Kim, Una for really exciting presentations. Thank you so much, colleagues, and thanks for sitting still and being with us and being interactive. So this session is now officially closed and appreciate your time.